Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now both the GTX 1050 and 1050 Ti are very capable modern budget cards, ideal for 1080p gaming setups. I tested the mini 1050 a while ago, but a tiny 1050 Ti is also available and it's one of my favourite versions of the GPU because of how it fits into almost anything, giving users the ability to turn even a basic home system into a gaming machine. I've always been happy with the Full HD performance, but one of you asked me on Twitter how it handled 4K and I just had to investigate. Even though you will want something more powerful for an ideal 2160p experience, this should give you some idea of what to expect if you want to explore the world of Ultra HD on a relatively sensible budget. As you can see, we've already got some gameplay up on the screen and I'll be testing a mix of older and newer games. With 4K enabled and our test titles lined up, it's time to talk about the results. We started off with the still amazing looking Far Cry 3, which ran with 40 FPS at 4K with the highest settings. Any anti-aliasing has been turned off, as with all tested games today, because at this resolution it simply isn't needed and it makes everything unplayable with this card that has never really been intended for 4K resolution. Far Cry's tropical vistas look stunning, and as usual I tried to find a nice balance between graphical settings and performance throughout. In GTA 5 the game was set mostly to high and in return we saw 34 FPS on average. 60 frames per second isn't really a possibility at 4K with the 1050 Ti, so I decided instead to do my best to make the games look as good as possible while maintaining at least 30 FPS, except for CSGO, which we'll move on to shortly. If you wanted to stick everything on normal here, then you could expect closer to 50 FPS, which is very impressive for this card in my opinion. Moving on to the aforementioned CSGO, and the game ran easily at 4K with the low settings, so I decided to turn a few things up a bit and included a mixture of all the settings in this gameplay. This game is much more CPU intensive, so the 118 FPS average was mainly thanks to the cheap yet capable 3.9 GHz overclocked Ryzen 3. It actually felt very smooth too, so if you're a big fan of CSGO and have a 4K monitor, then you should have a very pleasant experience. Perhaps one of the most surprising results was Battlefield 1, a very nice looking yet quite well optimised game in my experience, which on the opening tank level achieved 31 frames per second at 2160p. Not a super ideal frame rate, especially considering multiplayer, but the 1050 Ti handled it better than I thought. Crysis III, a game that actually released on the 360 and PS3 back in the day, still looks excellent on PC and runs very well at 1080p on the 1050 Ti. At 4K, however, expect some frame drops below 30 that don't actually feel that bad, and an overall average frame rate of 33. Playable once again, but if you insist on 60 FPS, then 1080p is the ideal resolution here. One of my favourite games, Borderlands II, is another older title that we could crank right up to the high settings here and see a pretty decent return in performance. 44 FPS on average to be exact. There will be moments of slowdown, as there will be on any setting and in fact any game with this mix of card and resolution, but it looked good and played well overall. Finally, I tried out GTA 4, an older game that released in 2008 and one that still won't run on the highest settings on any of my hardware smoothly. It is possibly the worst console port ever. At 4K it ran at a pretty impressive 45 FPS with some dips into the low 20s and some increases that took us above and beyond 60. Although these moments were brief, it goes to show that the performance of this game varies so much, and I have to admit it greatly depends on your CPU. I tested this on my i5 4460 as well, which is similar to the Ryzen 3 1200, and that exhibited far more stutter, which was strange. To conclude, the 1050 Ti can handle 4K 30 FPS and a little bit above, but don't expect anything near 60 frames per second with newer games. In fact, titles like PUBG, AC Origins and other new releases will not run well at 4K at all, but it's nice to see that if you have this card the option is there, and it will be a 50-50 outcome as to whether or not your favourite games are playable or not. You shouldn't buy the 1050 Ti with 4K gaming in mind, but if you want to add a little more graphical spice to some of those older titles in your library, it certainly isn't impossible with this $139 card. Guys, thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. It's nice to see that older games are playable on a tighter budget with a card like this. If you enjoyed the video, leave a like on it. If you didn't enjoy the video, leave a dislike. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next one.